What do you do at the end of the world? Post-apocalypse media has been steadily growing more and more to the point where I've seen it go from a relatively niche genre to fully mainstream in my lifetime. And consistently we see worlds of struggle, pain, and violence depicted. Just as our own anxieties about the instability of our own society grows larger and larger, post-apocalypse media has grown proportionally, as if to harness our growing anxiety that our own world will inevitably turn our planet to a harsh wasteland of survival, whether it's nukes, disease, or climate crisis human hubris. We imagine worlds where society's rules are wiped away and we revert to stories of pettiness, survival, and violence. I want to present to you perhaps the most unusual post-apocalyptic piece of media, one that looks at the end and says something truly different about it. It is not a story of gas tyrants and raiders, or factions fighting for control repeating the mistakes of the past, or the bleak and brutal decline of humanity, but of healing, acceptance, and the beauty of being alive. I want to talk about Yokohama Kaidashi Kikou, and why it's one of the best post-apocalyptic and slice-of-life anime out there. But to first talk about this show, we need to define a few terms, starting with Iyashikei. Iyashikei, or healing-type media, has existed in Japan for quite a long time, but really became popular in the mid to late 90s. In Paul Roquette's essay, Ambient Literature and the Aesthetics of Calm, he discusses how Japan has had a long history of healing goods as a means of personal mood regulation. That is, things that create a certain mood within the person who uses them. In particular, he pointed to 1995 as a particularly tragic year in Japan's history, with the Great Hanshin earthquake in January and the Tokyo subway sarin attack in March as particularly traumatic events for the entire nation. This created a need for catharsis, one method which was the rise of the Iyashikei or healing type genre. Roquette continues to discuss the rise of ambient literature in Japan throughout the 90s, works which explicitly created calming moods when read and provided a space free of the outside world to be calm and at peace. Although the concept did exist as early as the late 70s, it was the aftermath of the traumas in the 90s that created a sudden boom and calcification of the genre. While Roquette's essay focuses mainly on literature, it applies just as well to anime from the 90s onwards. From My Neighbor Totoro all the way up to the recent Eurocamp, we've had a whole genre of Iyashikei and slice of life, where conflicts are minimal and easily resolved, pacing is leisurely, the whole atmosphere has a pervasive feeling of comfort and peace. The whole sensation is like crawling into a warm blanket on a snowy day. Enter Yokohama Kaidashi Kikou. Initially published in 1994, Yokohama Kaidashi Kikou, aka Yokohama Shopping Log, or YKK for short, began life as a manga written by Hitoshi Ashinano in Kodansha's monthly afternoon magazine. It follows the life of an android who runs a cafe on the edge of a village that itself sits on the edge of civilization after an unspecified worldwide cataclysm. In 1998, a direct-to-video 2-episode anime was produced by Ajay Do Animation Works, followed by another 2 episodes in 2003 subtitled Quiet Country Cafe. They adapt selected chapters from the manga, but given their 14 volumes of manga, they cover only a fraction of the chapters ever written. And that's it. There's very little in terms of meaningful stories and throughline in the manga, and even less so in the anime. While the manga covers enough of the passage of time where we see characters grow and we learn some of the mysteries around the world, the show omits, or rather chooses not to focus on these things. Because those mysteries and that story was never the focus of the manga, and less so the focus of these 2 one-hour shows. Instead, the adaptations don't focus on plot, character, or even movement, but like any good Iyashikei, focuses on the atmosphere, mood, and vibes. More than anything, YKK is a mood piece. Usually, when we approach a piece of media, it's the plot, characters, and world building that we latch onto most readily, with the mood choices, such as background, pacing, music, being in service to those ideas. However, YKK flips this. The show spends so much time on beautiful backgrounds, animating small actions, and in the case of the first series, go into full music video interlude territory just to get across the sense of peace and mild melancholy. That's not to say themes, character, and world building do not exist, rather they are in service of the mood. Alpha is defined as a character, but we don't see enough of the story here to see her character necessarily develop. Things happen, but they do not really form a plot. Quiet Country Cafe, the second OVA, has a bit more structure to it. The first episode centers around taking refuge from a storm, and the second episode follows Alpha journeying across Japan. But both stories again take their time, less intent on reaching any conclusion or revelation, more on each individual moment. In comparison, the manga's 14 volumes has so much room to breathe. We do see characters grow up and slowly change. In fact, the journey Alpha takes across Japan is one of those moments of character development in the manga, but in the anime it's cut short by the runtime, with her change being an implied thing at best. Yet across all three versions, all these things remain more or less implied. We never see or learn more about Alpha's owner, or about what happened to the world, or the bigger building blocks of the world's lore. Going back to Roquette's essay on ambient literature, he states, "This is a type of mystery, just a tiny bit, no sokoshi, separated from the familiar. There is no gaping anxiety of a mystery that threatens to topple the known world. Instead, just a touch of mystery surfaces, contained and vaguely familiar, not unlike a daydream. This basic equation of translucent simplicity plus comfortable mystery governs the emotional architecture of ambient literature." Although Roquette is focusing on the Japanese novel Oteru Moru in this quote, it applies equally as well to all versions of Yokohama Kaidashi Kikou. In YKK, these mysteries don't threaten us with their revelations, but simply exist in the background. Mount Fuji is a good example. We don't know much about the eruption and possible tragedy that gave the mountain its new shape, but Alpha does comment that she prefers its relaxed look to how it once was. Some mysteries, like the story of Alpha's owner, remain true mysteries that exist to evoke a past unknown to us. There's a relationship there between Alpha and the owner that is evoked sometimes, but never revealed. Other mysteries, like the entirety around the apocalypse that created the setting, exist in the same space for us as it does for Alpha, a part of history that remains unknowable and ultimately non-consequential to the new pace of life. Like plot and character, mystery is another one of those things that's in service to the mood. It's a thing of the past, but the show wants us to be here in the present. So let's talk about time. Let's talk about pacing. One way in which anime and manga are irrevocably different is how time is controlled by the viewer. A reader can turn the page whenever they want, flipping through each moment quickly to get to the next dialogue bubble, or dwell into details of an intricate panel as long as they care for. But readers ultimately control the flow of time. Not so in animation, where the animator chooses the number of frames they want to spend depicting a given scene, every 24 filling out one single second we must sit through. So how bold it is for each show that only has 1 hour across 2 episodes to take so much time with its material. Leisurely is a generous word for the pacing here. I really want to focus on the first OVA because I just love its colors. I love how we see the lights change from scene to scene slowly and naturally as the day passes. The wind is constantly present, shown through the cafe's thin vein, or heard in the soundscape of rustling grass and ocean waves. In our opening story, we can feel the time pass throughout the day, the morning light give way to afternoon heat, and then the evening's cool. You really feel that the two characters, Alpha and Kokone, have spent the entire day together, and you feel that utter remoteness of Alpha's cafe, given the time spent just watching Kokone travel to, and then from, there. But it is the story segment, The Wind Was Blowing, which really captures the intentionality of YKK's pacing. This sequence from episode 2, which doesn't really seem to be adapted from any single chapter, is a roughly 7-minute segment where time is almost treated in a surreal manner. As Alpha goes through the process of waking up, opening a cafe, brewing coffee, and then drinking it, we go through the entire day. The one mundane series of actions is abstractly pulled out across the entirety of this windy day, each step showing the light seep in and slide out of the cafe until Alpha enjoys her coffee. And each moment of the day has its own distinct palette: soft lavender for the morning, bright sunny blue for the afternoon, an orange-purple sunset, and a deep purple fading light into the dark midnight twilight. And then, this. Alpha states in the first episode, there are no unnecessary scenes. Somewhat cheeky to state in a show where almost nothing happens. But the nothing is the point. Dramatic things have happened, and in the manga, they do happen, but between the pages of the chapters we see, off screen, as it were. The growing of a boy, the death of an old man, some catastrophe in the ancient past, some unknowable future. These aren't the times we are meant to focus on. Just as valuable is the texture of the everyday. The small upsets in life where everything works out in the end, days exploring by oneself, or small visits that blossom to new friendships. These are the human moments that matter in Yokohama Kaidashi Kikou. There's a certain structure to the first YKK anime, even if it is made up of standalone vignettes. Each episode opens with a story where Alpha's androidness plays a role, emphasizing both how she is a robot, different and apart from people, but also deeply human and feeling, and part of their community. The opening stories of the first OVA, Morning 2-2 and Afternoon 1-1, more or less introduce the world, the daily life of Alpha, and Alpha herself. The show takes its time showing her waking up, enjoying her morning coffee and radio, opening her cafe, and serving exactly 0 customers. We cut between this and the slow arrival of another woman in the village, cutting from train to taxi to walking as she travels further and further out to reach Alpha's cafe. She's a courier, there to deliver a package, a camera from Alpha's absent owner. She also has a message, which is where we find out that both Alpha and this courier, Kokone, are androids. The exchange here is great. Alpha initially doesn't know Kokone is also like her, and bounces between confusion, then excitement at meeting someone who shares a lived experience with her. When she has to receive the message directly, she's shy but excited, clearly not used to exposing her more android tendencies. What follows is a moment of intimacy that we witness but are separated from. I think the small decision to push us away from this private moment while still letting us see the intimacy of the act really captures not just the differences between android and human, but also remind us as viewers that this is a moment for two people, similar to each other and different from the rest of us, to share that experience that belongs to them, not us. It's a great moment of solidarity and recognition in this world, which contrasts so heavily to the presence of handguns on both of these characters that you may have caught if you were watching closely. The rest of the sequence follows the two robots going over how to use the camera and becoming friends. Although this is Kokone's only appearance in this show, you can already tell she will continue to be one of Alpha's closest friends. And throughout this story, I think we really understand just how human an android is in this world. Kokone guides Alpha as the more experienced android through the weirdness of using the camera, showing her how to navigate this new third eye. It's charming how naturally Alpha eventually picks up this skill, and how the animation makes her use of the camera look as natural as any human interaction. But I think most importantly, despite this story being about navigating the subtle intricacies of being an android, their interactions and experience remain deeply relatable and human. This story of finding a kindred soul like oneself ends not with Kokone and Alpha parting ways, but pushes a little further, and focuses on a different interaction between Alpha and someone else. We end on Alpha and Oji-san, Alpha's human friend who manages the village gas station, talking, sharing, and laughing in the sunset, sharing a deeply human moment of connection they most likely share every day as best friends. Like the first episode, the second episode of YKK also explores Alpha's humanity within her android being. The opener for episode 2, Rain and Aftermath, may be the most dramatic development in the entire series. Alpha is found by Oji-san and taken to an android specialist, where we peek into the stranger side of Alpha's android nature in her treatment and recovery. Her skin and hair have to get replaced, and she experiences a peeling unique to androids. Despite this is also where we see her perhaps at her most human. She muses that although her tear ducts were designed initially for keeping her optical tissues moist, she forms tears during her recovery, noting that this would sometimes happen when playing her moon guitar alone. But this time the feeling is something different, something new. She likes the feeling, which could possibly be the first time she's experiencing relief of this sort in her life. These deep, sometimes frightening, first experiences are at the thematic center of this segment, something we would see explored further in the second OVA, Quiet Country Cafe. These aren't just tears of someone recovering from a frightening accident, but their first time experiencing such a thing. And despite the superficial differences of having android skin and hair replaced and the uniquely comical properties of the newly installed android hair, the central experience of being cared for, visited by concerned friends, and recovery are all familiar to us. I think this is a great way to start the second episode because we discover that Alpha has a certain youth, a part of her that has yet to learn new things about being alive, an idea that is reintroduced at the very end of this episode in the final segment. We establish, by the end of this first OVA, how deeply human being an android is. Touching ever so slightly to Alpha's deeply human nature, never stated and barely hinted at, is the reality that Alpha does not age. The manga, and the shows even less so, never directly address this, but we can feel it again in the present melancholy mood of a peaceful, relaxed, but melancholy age. We never see Alpha's owner, and as more and more time passes with his absence, and the request for Alpha to go out and discover the world and make memories, we perhaps already know that his is the first of many goodbyes Alpha will experience in her effectively immortal life. This isn't a bleak end for Alpha though. Apart from all the people and Alpha herself, there's something beautiful that's always going to exist. Something persistent and bigger and more beautiful than herself and those around her. Even more than the other robots who share the same fate as her, who will persist after the last human fades from the age of evening calm. As both episodes open on stories about Alpha's android humanity, both of these episodes close on stories about the natural splendor of the world around her. The first episode ends on the story Navigation. Navigation opens with Alpha noting how she hasn't been taking any pictures with her new camera. So, she decides to change that. After taking a quick photo of her scooter, she sets out to make new memories, although she gets a bit of perfection anxiety when the moment comes to snap a shot. She asks herself when she's become so stingy with memory making, because she's got space for hundreds upon hundreds of pictures if she wished. But that's okay, because her whole journey for that day really centers on one picture, capturing the sunset at Enoshima. However, upon reaching her destination, she is so awestruck by the natural beauty of the setting, she forgets to take the picture. Her only record of the day ends up being the quick impulsive shot of her scooter. But as she says, that one picture is good enough for me. Even without photos, her memory of that day are more vivid, more deeply ingrained than usual. A similar story closes out the second episode and the entire first series. It's another story of Alpha taking the day off to travel to catch a particular view. And there she encounters one of the other characters, the Doctor, also there to enjoy the sights. And I think this is where the show is at its most beautiful, when the two watch the sunset. When night emerges, the old power of the sunken Yokohama comes on, and the lights of the past age illuminate, bringing light to the underwater streets. The original purpose of the lights of the past are long gone, but instead exist simply to shine, a reminder of days past for the old, and a moment of mesmerizing beauty for the new. Alpha is there with this sight, and we are there with her. Her tears return again, different from the ones when she played her moon guitar, awoke from the hospital, or had her hair pop out in embarrassment. I don't think we could have had this moment if we did not spend so much time setting the melancholy, peaceful, quiet mood of this world. I don't think we could have gotten here if we rushed it or spent this time getting to know Alpha and how deeply human and caring she is. For us to be with her here, we took our time, just as she did, and truly got to be in harmony with the age of evening calm. Returning to the broader Iyashikei genre, one thing we find is that there's little to no drama. It is as non-confrontational as you can get. Even when there are sometimes major upsets or problems, there is also a trust in a good piece of healing media that the author will resolve it, that even potentially dangerous situations will resolve peacefully and the media will return to the mood it is trying to create. This can lead to active escapism in the media and an active effort to avoid anything uncomfortable and, in turn, also avoid anything insightful or meaningful to say. Roquette mentions towards the conclusion of his essay, Kuroko cites Yoshimoto's description of how sometimes, when she's feeling bad, simply eating a piece of cake is all that is necessary for her to turn her feelings around and be happy for the rest of the day. Kuroko points out that this comforting use of food as an example of Yoshimoto's apathy towards wider social struggles. These critics regard Iyashi media as a solipsistic practice, a way of using close-at-hand positive affect to block out the more disturbing aspects of the world at large. I think this may be true for some Iyashikei, but I do not think this is the case for Yokohama Kaidashi Kikou. If the series really was escapism, with nothing to say about tragedy and the sad parts of living, it wouldn't have chosen to be set after the end of the world. Choosing to set a story after a collapse, even if it is barely directly addressed, doesn't mean that it is not present, or that it doesn't texture the mood of what we watch and read. We are reminded in little ways of violence existed. In the manga, an old military missile is reworked into a celebratory firework. In the opening minutes of the first OVA, a gun that is never fired sits prominently in the frame, as if to trick us into thinking that this show will be much more dramatic than it turns out to be. The ending of the OVA is at once beautiful, but built on the ruins of an age that is over. And the manga itself ends on a goodbye to humanity itself, and the peaceful entering of an age of night after the evening calm. What is healing about all of it is that we are at the very tail end of tragedy. In this world's 5 stages of grief, we are in the acceptance, reconstruction, and recovery side of the stages. We are not just after the collapse, but also the immediate aftermath, the violent survivalism, and even the messy politics of the rebuilding of the New World. In fact, all of those things seem to be absent in this version of the post-apocalypse. But still, the world seems to have done its mourning for the old world, and we are now here to see how the coming generation will go about and embrace the current world. And that's why I think the mood is the driving force that carries all of these ideas, characters, and themes for us. Other post-apocalyptic media is to some extent concerned about the world that came before. Whether it's a violent struggle for the resources of the past, or ideological struggles of how to carve up a nuclear wasteland. But YKK keeps us constantly in the present, the very moment, never rushing past or cutting away, and keeping us firmly in place with our characters and alongside them so we feel what they feel. And what they feel is a deep connection to this world they find themselves in, which is calm and beautiful and peaceful, not tragic or violent or deadly. The last thing I want to mention here is that this is a society of care, of mutual support, and people free of prejudice, greed, and discrimination. What place does this have in a dying world, truly? We are presented with an alternative on how to live our lives, a presentness that is possible within this post-collapse, but maybe we don't need to see all of our towns fall underwater to put a bit of that existence into our everyday lives ourselves. In presenting the world this way, I think it presents perhaps the most radical idea yet, that if the world ends, we won't revert to violent animals, but creatures of care and quiet, with our twilight years being restful days where we may perhaps be at our most beautiful and appreciative. And perhaps this is who we are at our very core. Thank you for joining me on my first video essay. This kind of video captures what I want to do in this channel more, and spend some time on more introspective pieces, and share what makes certain anime really stand out to me, and how deep and fulfilling the medium can get. I know I focused mostly on the first Yokohama Kaidashi Kikou series, but I also think that everything I said about pacing, Alpha's characterization, and the use of natural beauty applies to the second show as well. You can also feel the legacy of Yokohama Kaidashi Kikou in other more experimental Iyashikei type anime. If you really enjoy this show, then Girls' Last Tour is another show that explores slice of life in a much more bleak, hopeless post-collapse world. Haibane Renmei is another show that balances the quiet slice of life with the strange surrealness of a purgatory world and a story about redemption and healing. And if you simply want to enjoy more nature and cozy feelings, you can always fall back on the more traditional laid-back camp for an anime equivalent of that warm, woolly blanket. I've also included additional reading if you want to dig deeper into the show's manga and overall works. I've included a link to Roquette's essay that I quote in the descriptions below. Sarah Guinevere Smit's essay on transgender reading of Yokohama Kaidashi Kikou is also valuable, and although I feel unqualified to lean heavily on it, it will also be in the description below. Finally, the YouTube channel Pause and Select also discussed the manga as part of their Understanding Disaster series and digs deeper into the relationship of nature, apocalypse, and harmony. Like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and I'll keep making longer essays like this in the future. It's been a journey making this first video where I get to dig deep into a show that I love, and I can't wait to share more of what I consider best of the best shows with you. But once again, thank you, and enjoy the simple pleasure of watching or rewatching Yokohama Kaidashi Kikou.